Okay. So, like I said, we're going to talk a little bit about how your student employment experience can be translated and be relevant to so many different things later on and the career that you're going to end up choosing in the long run. Um, and really just how to market yourself and say, like, everything that I did as a student worker is really relevant. And so, the first thing I want to talk about with you guys is these career competencies. And there's 8 of these that every year this organization called MACE puts out um, they put out a survey and they ask employers to go through and rank, what do they look for in new hires? And every year it's the same 8. Now, one may be a little higher up on that list than others. Like 1 year leadership may be higher than the digital technology, but it's always those same 8. And what I want to go over with you guys is let's look at these career competencies and think about like how can these lead you to developing skills in the future that are really relevant for what you need in that future career, and like how are you developing now in your current student employee positions. um, if you have any comments, feel free that you can put them in the chat or you can just kind of shout them out. Okay, and then so what I want to move on to is we're going to look at this little activity that I want to show you guys. We're going to take a few minutes to read over the competencies that are listed in our career guide, and I'll link them and share my screen with you so you don't have to actually log off and go do that. But so we're going to look through these competencies and see where you see these in your current position. So we'll have to talk a little bit. Let me see. So if we follow this link, it brings you to our career guide. And so if we scroll down, just a little bit more. Okay, so I promise we're going to get there. So these career competencies. And so here's those same 8 that we just looked at on the PowerPoint. And so let's take a few seconds and look through and just at first glance, can somebody tell me which one you think that you use the most right now in your student position? I can make it big screen if that helps. Yeah.
I can go.
Okay. What do you think?
I'm an RA on campus, so I use a lot of critical thinking and problem solving because there's a whole lot of issues that come up every day, and you're like the person on the front line for a lot of them. So it's a lot of figuring out what to do in the situation.
Yeah, absolutely. It takes so much just kind of sitting down and saying, like, okay, here's the problem at hand, and what do we do from here? Right. And so, how do you think that'll be relevant in a future career?
Well, I think you're probably going to have to critical think or problem solve in pretty much anything you're in. So, and obviously, it's number one for a reason because a lot of employers think it's valuable for their positions. So, I think it'll help me no matter what.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody else want to give it a go? Which one do you think that you use the most in your current position?
I would say teamwork and collaboration. I currently work at Louisiana Transportation Research Center. And my manager, he assigns like different projects we do, but we only like collab with him because he assigns everybody their own individual project. And so we just share, like basically we like brainstorm ideas off each other. So basically it's like we both contribute to the project that he assigned.
Yeah. And it takes a lot of communication on that part, just kind of trying to understand like what are the needs, and I think my idea is good, but like how else can we grow this idea, right? Thanks for
Yes.
sharing.
No problem.
Okay, and so going back to our PowerPoint, what do you believe is the value of having these competencies? We talked about it a teensy bit.
I feel like, hold on, wait, can you guys see me? Or like hear me?
Yeah, you're good.
I'm like at work. Oh, okay. Hey guys. Okay.
Hey.
Okay, so I was gonna say, like, if you don't have those, then like you're not gonna really like get your job done, or like you're not gonna be effective, and like a lot of people won't take you seriously. Like you're not gonna get hired, or you're gonna get fired.
Yeah, that's like kind of like the bigger piece of it, but even just looking at the littler sides is just kind of like these are so important in creating those building blocks of, you know, these are the basics of what I need to be a good employee, right?
Mhm.
Which is kind of what you were getting at, just saying like, to be good at this job, you have to have these really basic competencies. Um, so let's move on to the next slide. And so we've talked about, here's these competencies, here's what we know that we need to get those jobs and make sure that you're a really valuable worker and prospective employee. And so now, how do we actually market ourselves and make sure that you're saying and showing to these people that you're absolutely fit for the job? And so, what I'm going to share with you guys is an employability grid, and I'll share it on my screen as well. But it's in the career guide. I made a Word document version of it. Let's see what page it was on. Page 24. So in here on page 24, this is the grid. I'm going to drop it in the chat. It should then. Okay. And so if you want, you can go and fill it out and, you know, on your own time, just say, like, okay, in detail, here's where everything fits. And here is where I was able to develop all of these skills. And if we look at this this grid, we see that the ones with the little stars next to them are the competencies that we just looked at. And so you can see it starts with like you can develop these in courses and projects and that kind of stuff. And what we're focusing on today is your student employee position. And so we talked about already, Ariana works in a research center and has so much teamwork and collaboration. And so we know that that research center would fit in this box here. Um, and what you can do is go through and say, like, okay, does my student employee job check all of these boxes? And that way I know that I'm developing these skills. Then, let's see. I'm going to go back. I had intended on us actually like sitting down and going through this grid, but instead, let's kind of just talk about, let's look at the grid again and have a discussion on, are there things in here where there's been certain instances where you've definitely developed these skills at your student employee position? I can go first if y'all would like me to go first. Yeah. Okay. So I know for me, right now, I am a graduate assistant at the Career Center, and so much of my job is this oral and written communication piece because every day I have to talk to students and make sure that like I am communicating effectively and making sure that my students understand the things that they need in order to create a good resume or in order to you know successfully go through the job search and those kind of things. Olivia, I'm gonna pick on you. What do you think in your RA position? Like, is there any specific?
Recently, it's been flexibility and adaptability. One of our res halls isn't able to do, like, our RAs for one of the res halls, like the whole group of RAs for that hall can't do their job for the next 2 weeks. So we're having to all take over for the people that can't be there. So it's asking a lot more of us, but having to be flexible and adaptable is like part of the job because everything's always changing.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's such a good example of having to step in, and you were able to say exactly how you're having to step in and for how long. And that's going to be a big piece of whenever we go further into this presentation of like giving those exact details and really painting the picture. Ariana or Anna, do y'all have any more input?
I would definitely say time management. Like with the pandemic going on and trying to juggle school and work at the same time. Like as I said before, he assigns like different projects. I mean, he doesn't put a due date on because of the pandemic, but it's been kind of hard to like juggle both and making time to do homework and coming to work and getting my work done. But I mean, I'm getting it done. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a lot of prioritizing and scheduling things out, right? It's making sure that, you meet all of those deadlines. And that's something we'll talk about as well is, you have deadlines, and in any job you're going to have deadlines that you have to meet. And so that's another transferable skill that is so awesome to include that you get from your student worker position. Anna, do you have any thoughts?
I think that oral and written communication is probably what I do the most because I like working the front desk. So I'm like
Yeah.
constantly talking to people and then like running to my boss and be like, what do I tell them?
Yeah.
So,
And we could even say that that includes a little bit of your problem solving, right? And just kind of figuring out, like, okay, this person just called the front desk and I don't know what to tell them.
yeah, that's
So,
probably how it goes.
yeah, it's figuring out, like, okay, this is exactly what I need to do. And we could even bump that into a little bit of teamwork and collaboration. And we'll go into detail a little more in a second, but I'm glad you brought that up because some of them can overlap. And like whenever you're explaining one piece or one competency that you got out of your student employment, you'll kind of find that you start to realize that they all branch out. And yeah, you have your oral and written communication, which then turns into, oh yeah, you also have problem solving, and then the teamwork and collaboration because you had to talk to somebody and figure out what's the best way to talk to these people.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks for sharing, guys. Okay, so let's go to the next one. And we've kind of started this conversation. Whenever you are really starting to market your skills and explain, I have these really great experiences. How do I make sure that they're relevant? On your resume, you're going to create bullet points, and these are going to be things where you finally get to give detail about this is exactly what your experience was like. And your bullet points give you the opportunity to say, this is what I did, here's my skills, here's how often I did these things. And so for your resume, you want to focus on those transferable skills, just like we talked about whenever we were looking at that grid. A lot of these are transferable skills that are going to be relevant in any position. Like you're going to have to be a team worker, you're going to need those communication skills, and absolutely you need problem solving skills. And whenever you're creating those bullet point statements, you're going to want to start off by saying, you know, here's what I did, how I did it, and why I did it. And one of the formulas that we like to use is breaking it down. And so you never want to say, in your resume, create a bullet point and say, I am a good communicator because I work in a res hall. Like we want to say, communicated with residents about XYZ in order to promote a safe environment, like something like that. And we'll go over a few examples in a second of how we can effectively communicate those things. Um, the other thing is on your resume, like obviously today we're focusing a lot more on your student employment, but your resume experience section can also include full-time jobs, part-time internships, volunteer positions that you've had, leadership positions on campus. So if you're in an organization and if you're like a committee member or on a chair, or if you're president of the organization, like so many of those things count as real valuable experience. Um, you can also lump in class projects with that as well. And as long as it's like a longer class project and a big one. So let's look at some bullet point examples. So this is what we say is weak writing. So if we look at it for a second, here's our typical, resume format where you give the job title, you go into detail about like this is where it was, or this is the company that it was for, and this is the location, and then how long you were there. And then so if we look at these bullet points, do you see any transferable skills that just kind of like pop out at you?
There's teamwork and communication.
Yeah, definitely. Teamwork and communication are the big ones that we see right here. Um, Especially because they just kind of like throw them at us, right? They just say like, "Hey, I have teamwork and I have communication skills." But whenever we look at those specific ones, do you get any idea of like how they develop those skills or how they use those skills? I see some head shakes. No, I would agree. Like we don't really get to see how exactly they use those skills and how they develop them. And that's the important thing about really translating your experience and saying, I have these skills, this is how I got them, and this is why it's relevant. And so we can also see that they don't start their bullet points with any strong action verbs. They kind of just said, they have teamwork skills. Okay, cool. And then we have they they said being a waitress requires that I have strong communication and customer service skills. But that's still not starting with a strong action verb. We also see a lot of that word I, and you want to stay away from that in your resume. You want to just really get to the point. And so, like I said, you start with that strong action verb and then you go into detail about what you were doing. And so now let's look at some strong writing. Here we have same resume and we fixed it. We gave it a little more of those changes that needed to happen to make sure it was a really strong resume, and they explained exactly what they did. And so now if we look at this, what um what skills jump out at you whenever you read through it? Any takers?
I think the 4 action verbs at the beginning really jump out for me.
Yeah,
It's easy to see exactly what they're talking about and what skills that they have, and you don't have to search through the whole paragraph to find it.
exactly. Yeah. You don't question at all, like, what are they trying to get at? It's very easy to read. It's all right there. Um, Now, so let's go back to our competencies and let me find them. So, whenever we look here and we consider those bullet points that we just read, are there any skills that you say, like, okay, yeah, I definitely can understand that these skills are what they were talking about in their bullet points? I can move this if that helps. So remember, we have critical thinking and problem solving. We have that oral and written communication, teamwork and collaboration, leadership, career management. What do y'all think? Is there anything that you can kind of infer that, this is the skills that they were talking about?
I would say leadership because she mentions how she managed a section of 5 tables with potential for 25 guests at a time. I mean, that kind of takes a
Absolutely.
leader to like do that.
Yeah, it definitely does. I'm glad you brought that up. And so what you can see is that you don't have to outwardly just say, leadership. You can let them understand that that's what you mean as long as you communicate that effectively. And so here, even in my opinion, like training new wait staff on proper technique and Olive Garden protocol, that takes leadership as well. And so that can be inferred and understood that when an employer is looking at this resume, they can point out that like there's definitely leadership in this experience. We also see that communication piece. And so this person just said, communicate with staff, with kitchen staff to effectively expedite food to customers. Any questions so far? We're good? I see some. Yeah, okay. So let's move on to the next part. So now we've talked about how to market yourself in your resume and create those bullet points and make sure that you're saying, like, here's the skills that I have. Here is how I'm going to present it to you and explain that, like, this is really relevant to the job. And so now, how do we talk about those in interviews? Like, we've turned in our application, they've reached out, they said, okay, we're interested. And so now we really need to nail that interview. And so what I recommend is we look at our resume and we're like, okay, yeah, this is all the things that they were interested in, and this is how they found it relevant to the job that I'm applying for. And so now I need to talk about it, and I want to make sure that I'm not just stumbling over my words or repeating the same thing over and over. And what is really helpful is using this STAR method. And what you can do is break down your question whenever they ask it to you and present it in a way that you start off by describing the situation that you were in. And so you want to give detail about, this is the situation, this is how it happened. You want to really just paint the picture for them. And then you want to go into the task. So, what were you working towards? What goal was it? What were you hoping for the outcome to be? And then action. So you describe what you did in order to reach that goal. You want to keep the focus on you instead of saying, like, well, my group members did XYZ. We want to focus on, like, what did you do in that group? And then result. How did it turn out? Um, take credit for what you did really well and be able to say, like, I know that I did this well and this is why it ended up working out. And so most of the times you are going to use this method in questions where they ask you to kind of give a story. And those are what we call behavioral questions. I'll show y'all a few examples in a second, but what is typically asked is like, they'll say, describe a time when you had to resolve a conflict on a team. And so, um, does anybody, before I go, does anybody want to maybe try to answer that question using the STAR method? I'm getting some faces that look like no. Okay. Um, so I'll go ahead and answer that. What we would do is, so like I said, we want to start off with, you know, that situation. And so I'm going to use Anna's, like her current student position. She's working at a front desk. And so we have the situation is maybe we have a student that calls the front desk and they're frustrated because maybe they can't get an appointment. And so then the task is we are working on making sure that the student can get an appointment or that their needs are met in whatever way they need to be. And so the action is okay, so now we talk to my boss, and then we have to go and correspond with either the counselors or the advisors, anything like that, and make sure that, like, are there openings this week? Um, like, is there anybody that can take a quick phone call? Anything like that. And then the result is okay, so the student was able to hop on a quick 10-minute phone call with one of the coaches or advisors or counselors and resolve their issue. Do y'all see how I did that? You just kind of like break it down and go through the motions of this in your head and say, like, okay, here's all of the different pieces that I need to make sure I meet. Okay, so let's move on. So our second activity is I'm going to show y'all the the student career guide on our website that we've been looking at for our competencies and stuff. And we're going to look at the different questions. And what we can do is kind of just go over the ones that you feel really uncertain about, you've never seen, or things that you always hear that people get asked in interviews, but you have no clue how to answer. So let me pull this up for you guys. And so this is on page 52. Okay, so here we go. We have these sample interview questions. And so we'll start off by looking at these first two sections with personal and professional. Now I can zoom in. I'll give y'all like a minute or two to look at them, and then we can talk about which ones you don't know how to answer or you just have no clue, like how do you even start to answer these. How many of you guys have had an interview before? I see one hand. 2, 3. Okay, so most of us, right? Do these questions look familiar? Yeah, everybody's saying yeah. Okay, so let me ask you this. Which ones do you feel like you absolutely crushed? Like, which ones did, whenever you went in that interview, you were like, yes, I answered that question perfectly?
Like out of the professional and personal ones.
Yeah, out of the professional and personal. And then we'll scroll down and look at the other ones.
Probably like the second one for professional. How do you manage your time?
Okay. Yeah.
I feel like that was like the easiest one. Like I was asked that before to get this job, and
Yeah.
like I just do my homework during school, and like I don't want to tell you like the whole answer because it took like 5 minutes. I basically just told her like what I do, and she was like, "Yeah, that's." The person that was interviewing me was like, "That's impressive. Like most freshmen don't do that. Like they have different priorities and different ideas of what to do with it."
Yeah. Yeah. And so it's taking like your experience as a student, and in order to get your student position, and saying like, okay, this is what I have to do as a student, and this is how I'll be successful as a student worker, right? Does anybody else want to point out some questions or just want to talk about any of them before we move on to the next section?
I have a question.
Yeah.
How can you phrase, like when you have to talk about your weaknesses, how can you phrase it so it doesn't sound like you're pooping on yourself during the interview?
Yes. Okay. So that can be tricky, and it can be really awkward to talk about, here's what I'm good at, but here's like what I'm so bad at. And so, for instance, for me, I'll tell you how I typically answer this. Um, what I do is I present my weakness, but then I talk about how I am actively working on getting better at that weakness. And so for me, my weakness is I have a hard time not telling people no. And so I like to take on a lot of projects and then I get overwhelmed. And so what I have begun to do was creating a priority list for myself and saying, here's what I absolutely need to get done, and here's what I have time to take on extra. And so, what you can see that I did is I present my weakness, but then I say, okay, I'm still actively working on this, and I can identify my weakness, but I can acknowledge it and say, like, this is how I'm going to do better. And this is how I'm actively trying to improve that. That way, you're not saying, like, I'm so bad at this and that's it. Does that answer your question?
I have a question. Um, I have a hard time when they ask like, "Why should I hire you?" And I'm just like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like,
You're
I
kind of
hate
like,
that
well, I
question.
need
I'm
a
like,
job.
what?
Yes. Okay, so that is a chance for you to really hone in on those competencies that we just talked about and say, like you should hire me because I have these skills that are going to be really relevant and make such a difference in your workplace. And kind of brag on yourself there and say, this is what I'm good at and this is why I'm good at it. And what you're looking for in this position lines up with what I'm good at. Does that make sense? Yeah. And like you can give examples with that question too and just say, like during my time at the research center, I had to do a lot of teamwork and collaboration. And your job is looking for someone who can step into that role and be a good team worker and collaborator, which is why I'll be a good fit for this job. Okay, cool. So let's move on to the next section. Let's look at these last three. So behavioral, academic, and company specific. I will say, so these behavioral ones are the ones that we were talking about with that STAR method. And these are the ones where they're really prompting you to tell a story and explain in detail, like, how did you get out of these situations? Um, or like, what was the situation like? So, same thing with this. If you see one that you want to talk about, go ahead and just kind of unmute yourself and we'll talk. What's your initial reactions whenever you see these questions?
Well, I just took a management class. I think it's like employee recruitment. So like we've been focusing on like all these behavioral questions, and we've been doing like practice interviews. So she kind of told us like how to told us and gave us pointers on how to like nail those questions. So I don't know trouble with those. Just the company specific ones. Like the one that says what qualifications of and personal characteristics do you have to match our needs? So I don't know like how to answer it. I'm like,
Yeah, that one is actually really, it's very, very similar to the one about, why should we hire you? Um, where that's your chance to say, I have these exact experiences. And since we focus this today more on our student employment and how this is going to be relevant for the future, um, like let's use that as an example. And so with your student employment, you're going to be able to list out, here's these qualifications that I have, here's why it's relevant. And same thing. So like they on their job application, they may have said like they're looking for someone with great communication skills who is a leader. and has great problem solving skills. And so, like, with your student position, you'll be able to talk about, here's how I develop those skills, and this is why it's relevant to what you're looking for. Any other questions that y'all are looking at that are kind of just either you're like, oh yeah, I can totally answer that and I feel confident, or you're kind of like, I don't know.
I feel like these are easier to answer than the other ones, just because like these are more like personal. Like you have okay, so for example, behavior. Like, what have you learned from your mistakes? Like, that's a very personal question that anybody can just give like an honest answer to. But like before, I don't know. I feel like everybody kind of just sugarcoats their like. I mean, obviously, like it's good. Like you want to come off stronger than you really are. And that sounds bad, but everybody does that in an interview. And like, I guess that's good. But these are more like, okay, let's get more real. And like,
Yeah.
um, whenever Ariana, you were asking like the two questions about why should I hire you and what do you have that matches our needs, like if you ever get asked that in a real interview and you really want that job, make them feel like almost in a way like you're interviewing them. Like take this as your opportunity to be like, okay, am I like are you guys good enough for me? Like this is what I have to offer. Like are you guys going to take this? Like I don't know. I feel like that's such like a in a way it's almost as if like companies ask this question to be like kind of trip us up, but take advantage of it and like do like the reverse psychology thing. I don't know. Do you see what I'm saying? Like I feel like
Yeah,
that's so when I
I
put it
think
out.
I see what you're saying. A lot of it is,
Definitely, thank you.
yeah, a lot of it is kind of making sure that you read it's their opportunity to make sure that you know what you're getting yourself into, right? Instead of like it just being a application where you saw it and you were kind of like, I think it's a good enough job, and so you just applied without really reading into it. And so for this is their chance to be like, okay, did this person actually pay attention to what we're asking for? Um, and yeah, it's really a chance to brag on yourself and say like, I'm good at this, right? Like I learned all of these things, I'm relevant to your company. And I will say, like, you're going to want to make sure that you do research on the company and make sure that you know exactly what they're looking for, and making sure that you know that's what you are also looking for in a job. But Anna, I'm glad you brought up the what have you learned from your mistakes. I will say every now and then you'll get people that give a general answer, and it sounds like a general question where you can just kind of be like, well, I learned not to, I don't know, throw recycling in the trash. But really what they're looking for is for you to say, okay, um, one time at my job, I accidentally hung up on a student and didn't mean to, but then I didn't have a number to call him back with. And I had to figure that out. And so what I learned is that I had to make sure I knew how to use that phone. Um, so you're really just kind of like, they're not looking for a general answer. They're looking for a real in depth, like, this is what happened. Ariana, you have a question or a
Yeah.
comment?
Is that like, how for your answer you're like your weakness when we were talking about the strengths and weaknesses, and you were like you have a hard time saying no, you take like more on than and you get overwhelmed. Could you use that in that sense? Like you learn from that mistake, you know what I mean? Like not to do that in the future, and kind of just I don't know.
Yeah, you could absolutely do that. And the nice thing too is that like your interview gives you a chance to kind of in that beginning when they ask you about your strengths and weaknesses, you can kind of set up what you want to talk about later. And so like if you want to make sure that you come back to a time where you messed up, or like maybe you got overwhelmed, um like give like a little I guess synopsis in the beginning of like talking about you get overwhelmed. And then whenever they ask you about your mistakes, you can say, well, like I said, or like I mentioned earlier when I was talking about my weaknesses, I have a hard time telling people no. And so one instance that happened where I really made a mistake was, and then go into detail about that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, good questions.
I would say be careful. Like when you're giving an interview, like this person doesn't know you. So like don't make your weakness come off as like, oh, this is a serious, like an actual personality. Like I think you should turn your weakness into something good. Like say for example, like I take on too many tasks. Like I'm a people pleaser. I like to get my stuff done. I like to be on top of things. I would turn it more into that way instead of, oh, it's a mistake that I'm this way. Because it's still like something you need to work on, but it comes off as like, okay, that could be a good thing. You
There's
know?
a fine line, though, I do want to say. So you don't want your strength to be the same as your weakness,
Oh
because
yeah, definitely.
you don't want to have that, like, if you're a people pleaser and that's a good thing because you can meet needs, but then you're a people pleaser and that's a bad thing, then that gets just a little confusing. So you want to be able to clearly identify your strengths and clearly identify your weaknesses. And then, like I said earlier, which Anna kind of reiterated for me, is that like you you're able to talk about your weaknesses and then say, like, this is how I'm actively working on them, and this is what I'm doing to improve. Okay, so let's go back to our PowerPoint, um, and talk about just some interview tips, some do's and don'ts. So definitely you're going to want to practice your interview beforehand, and you're going to want to be able to talk about your experiences, um, and be able to communicate them in a way that you're saying, like, this is relevant and this is good stuff. um, you want to make sure that you maintain a smile. It, especially on the phone and being virtual, like, it's so awkward right now, and kind of just getting into that virtual situation and just kind of being like, okay, this is where we're at, this is what we got to do. And so keep a smile on your face. It just sounds more positive. um, it doesn't sound like you're kind of like, oh, here we go, here's another interview. You're going to want to dress professionally. um, Make sure that you're head to toe dressed professionally. I know that it's tempting, especially when you're online, to just wear like professional shirt and like from head to waist be professional. But sometimes, like, if you wear your pajama pants, you're probably going to be like, oh, well, the other part of me is just kind of like chilling. We're all good. But you want to make sure that you keep that persona of like, okay, you're here for an interview, it's going to be great, and you're ready to put that professionalism on. And then do your research on the company. And so that's what Ariana was bringing up about, here's these questions about the company specific, and how are they, like, how are you a good fit for their company? And so make sure that you have the knowledge of how to answer those questions and be able to point out, like, here's the things that this company's looking for, here's what interests you in this company that maybe sets them apart from another company. Just make sure that you're able to bring it to the table and say, I actually did the research and know what I'm talking about. So, some don'ts. You don't want to wear what you would wear to class. I know you can find yourself, like, if you're especially interviewing at home, it's more tempting to dress cozier and comfier, but do the full professional dress. I promise it goes a long way. And then don't log in late due to technical reasons. Make sure that, like, you log in early and you practice those Zoom links. If you're in person, make sure you show up early. Don't show up so early that they don't know what to do with you and you're just kind of like sitting in the lobby. But like 15 to 30 minutes is okay to show up early and just kind of get situated, get your mind together. If you have notes, make sure that you are prepared and that kind of stuff. Um, but more than likely, right now, it's going to be virtual. And so, like I said, test out that system, make sure you know how to use it. Maybe they use Skype instead of Zoom, and like make sure like things are updated on your computer, that you have good internet, that kind of stuff. Use a professional username. So like on our Zoom little camera windows, whatever you want to call them, we have our names posted right there. And so make sure that it's like it's your full name and not some username, or even like sometimes it'll pop up with your username. And so honestly, a lot of times the best bet is for you to use your LSU email as your username, um, because it's already pretty professional. It's not like you're saying like I love dogs at gmail.com. Like it's like, for instance, mine is a crame 4, and like just that. It doesn't really go into detail about what I like or dislike. Um, and then don't interview in your bed. Make sure that you can sit in a chair, sit up straight. It doesn't look like you're just lounging and chilling. Like you're there to do a real interview and present yourself in a manner that's saying like I'm here for this job, and like I'm gonna crush this interview. So, what's your questions? What do you got? I know we had a long discussion during this presentation, so we covered a lot, but is there anything that y'all want to go over again, or you have more questions about?
What do you say when somebody says, "Tell me about yourself"?
That's a good question. Um, so what you want to go over is, I know we keep talking about this, but it's relevant. So you want to go over, who are you? What is like relevant to you? And so right now, obviously, you're still a student, so that might be something that you want to talk about. You can talk about like when do you plan on graduating, but then that's also your chance to kind of tie in why you're there. And so you can talk about, um, like how you're gonna fit their needs and like you fit what they're looking for. Um, I just took notes on this question, so let me find my notes for you. Um, let's see. So, what you're going to want to do is frame it for that position. So, for instance, you're currently in student positions, and um, Anna, I'm going to pick on you. You're a front desk worker. And so, what you're going to talk about is like maybe you're going into sales. I'm just going to use that as an example. And so, you can talk about, hi, my name is Anna. I am a sophomore at LSU, and I plan on graduating in May of whatever. And, during my time as a student worker working a front desk, I have learned that, I have a passion for student or for community service or for customer service and being able to resolve issues and that kind of stuff. So you take it to a next level where you're introducing yourself, you're telling them the basics, but then you're going into detail about like, hey, by the way, this is what, like, you said you were looking for these specific things, and like in my time working as a student worker, I've developed these specific things, and it kind of gives them like a quick overview of what they're going to expect to talk about. Any other questions? That was a good one, Anna.
Okay, sorry, one more.
You're good.
I took like this class kind of sort of like on interviews, and the lady was like, whenever you finish your interview and they're like, do you have any questions for me, like the employer will ask that or whatever, like they were like, take that as your opportunity to find out like who their best employee is. Like say like, what do you expect out of your best employee, and they'll tell you. And then she was like, take that and see if you'll live up to those expectations, because that's what they're going to expect from you, and if you're not willing to do that, then maybe you shouldn't work there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's a
So I
really
don't
good,
know if that's a good like tip or not. Like I was like, I don't know if I should do that.
yeah, it's a good chance for you to understand what the office is looking for, and you always want to have questions at the end of an interview, because if you don't, it kind of just looks like you're like, all right, I'm done, like whatever. So be engaged and have questions ready. I personally do like the question of asking, like, what was your best employee and what did they accomplish in their first 6 months in this position? And you can understand a little more of like, okay, here is what they're looking for. Maybe they're looking for someone that is willing to give up like 20 hours of their day to this job. And maybe that's just not something that you want to do. And so it gives you a good idea of understanding, you know, can I meet these needs? Is this something that meets my needs as well? And it's like I said, it's that opportunity for you to understand, like what are they looking for and is this something that I'm willing to do? Another good question to ask is asking about like what are the best parts of working for this company, or what are the most challenging parts of working for this company, and getting to understand what their office is like, and like I said, is that a atmosphere that you're going to want to be in? It's use those opportunities to really get a feel for what that office is like. Okay, cool. Any other questions?
Is,
No? Oh,
is that
hey,
sorry? Is that background picture from the career fair? Is
it
that what,
is.
okay? Because I've never
Yeah.
been, because I didn't know if it was worthwhile, but it seems like it's worthwhile now that I'm looking at it.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes on. So I will say, um, because the university is basically all virtual now, we are doing our career fairs virtually. I can show you here. One second. I'll show you how to access that since you brought it up. So if you go on Handshake and you, let's see, Handshake, and then I'm going to pick on myself. Did I not spell I didn't spell my name right. Um, so if you go on your Handshake account and then you go on events and you click on career fair. And so it'll come up with all of the ones that LSU has available for this spring. And you can click on one and kind of get a better feel for what's going to be available, who's going to be attending, like employer wise. And it'll give you instructions on how to access that career fair whenever it's time to do that. Um, you can also look on our website, so LSU Olinde Career Center, and then click on virtual events. And from there, you'll get a better feel for like what's coming up. It'll give you details about when are they, how do you attend. Same thing as Handshake, but you don't have to like log into Handshake. But yeah, so definitely worthwhile to attend. Even if you want to just practice talking about your skills and figuring out like what do you want to do, is this companies that you'd be interested in. Like you don't have to go only seeking out a job. It can be a chance for you to just network.
And they recommend bringing like a paper copy of your resume, right? How
Yeah.
many should you bring with you?
um it depends. If I would say look at companies before you decide to attend, um, and then figure out, maybe you see 10 that you definitely want to go see. And so, make copies of 10 resumes and then bring a few more, like a handful more, just to be sure. Like maybe there's a booth that you didn't see that showed up last minute that you're like, oh, yeah, I definitely want to go talk to them.
Okay.
Yeah, good questions. So the last thing I want to let y'all know is um, our appointments are all virtual right now, and we will schedule them through Handshake, or you can call our front desk and make an appointment, and they'll help you out. This is our general career account, like our email. and then that phone number, which you can find it all on our website. But thank you guys so much for attending. If you have any questions, I'll drop my email in the chat. Um, if you have any questions, feel free to email me. I'm more than happy to help you out. But otherwise, that's all I have for you guys. Awesome. Well, good luck with finals. I'm rooting for you guys.
Thank you.
Bye, y'all.